I'm about to read to you Operation Northwoods. This is a declassified, previously top secret document from 1962 drawn up by the Department of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This document entails plans for false flag operations to have a pretext for war, an excuse with Cuba, an excuse to go to war with Cuba. Now, my reasoning for doing this is to show people that no matter what you think about 9/11, whether you say it was an inside job or that the United States had knowledge and didn't stop it, or if you think your government could never do such a thing, my reasoning for doing this is to show you that our government is fully willing and capable and has drawn up plans in the past for doing such an act. Okay? Now, the beginning of this is a little dull. First, I'm going to tell you how this was released into the public, and then I'm going to read the document itself. It's not to the second half of the document that we get to the actual plans themselves. So hang in there and see if you can last until the good stuff. Okay, now how and why did this document get released into the public? Why was this declassified? I'm going to read to you a little from Wiki that shows you about the origins and the public release. The main proposal was presented in a document entitled, quote, Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba, Top Secret, unquote. Top secret collection of draft memoranda written by the Department of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The document was presented by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara on 13 March 1962 as a preliminary submission for planning purposes. The Joint Chiefs of Staff recommend that both the covert and overt aspects of any such operation be assigned to them. The previously secret document was originally made public on 18 November 1997 by the John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Review Board, a U.S. federal agency overseeing the release of government records related to John F. Kennedy's assassination. A total of 1,521 pages of once secret military records covering 1962 to 1964 were concomitantly declassified by said review board. Appendix to Enclosure A and Annex to Appendix to Enclosure A of the Northwoods document were first published online by the National Security Archive on 6 November 1998 in a joint venture with CNN as part of its 1998 Cold War television documentary series. Okay, let's jump right into this. Unclassified, 13 March 1962. Memorandum for the Secretary of Defense. Subject: Justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. Top secret. Number 1. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have considered the attached memorandum for the Chief of Operations Cuba Project, which responds to a request of that office for brief but precise description of pretexts which would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. Number 2. The Joint Chiefs of Staff recommend that the proposed memorandum be forwarded as a preliminary submission suitable for planning purposes. It is assumed that there will be similar submissions from other agencies and that these inputs will be used as a basis for developing a time-phased plan. Individual projects can then be considered on a case-by-case basis. Number 3. Further, it is assumed that a single agency will be given the primary responsibility for developing military and paramilitary aspects of the basic plan. It is recommended that this responsibility for both overt and covert military operations be assigned the Joint Chiefs of Staff. For the Joint Chiefs of Staff, L.L. Lemnitzer, Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. And here we are into the meat of the document. Justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. Top secret. The problem. Number 1. As requested by Chief of Operations Cuba Project, the Joint Chiefs of Staff are to indicate brief but precise description of pretext which they consider would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. Facts bearing on the problem. 2. It is recognized that any action which becomes pretext for U.S. military intervention in Cuba will lead to a political decision which then would lead to military action. Number 3. Cognizance has been taken of a suggested course of action proposed by the U.S. Navy relating to generated instances in the Guantanamo area. Come here, buddy. Come on. Are you going to be quiet while Daddy's recording? Come here. Come on. Let's go. Come. Come here. Okay, come here. Me and you, we're going to do this together then, since you won't be quiet. Okay. Number 4. For additional facts, see Enclosure B. Discussion. Number 5. The suggested courses of action appended to Enclosure A are based on the premise that U.S. military intervention will result from a period of heightened U.S.-Cuban tensions, which place the United States in the position of suffering justifiable grievances. World opinion and the United Nations Forum should be favorably affected by developing the international image of the Cuban government as rash and irresponsible, and as an alarming and unpredictable threat to the peace of the Western Hemisphere. Isn't that right, Marvin? Huh? They're going to lie to the American people so we could go to war. More people will die and the fat cats will sell more weapons. And the banks can finance it all. Okay. Number 6. While the foregoing premise can be utilized at the present time, it will continue to hold good only as long as there can be reasonable certainty that U.S. military intervention in Cuba would not directly involve the Soviet Union, because that could be a problem. There is as yet no bilateral mutual support agreement binding the USSR to the defense of Cuba. Cuba has not yet become a member of the Warsaw Pact, nor have the Soviets established Soviet bases in Cuba in the pattern of U.S. bases in Western Europe. Therefore, since time appears to be an important factor in resolution of the Cuba problem, all projects are suggested within the time frame of the next few months. Conclusion. Number 7. The suggested courses of action appended to Enclosure A satisfactorily respond to the statement of the problem. However, these suggestions should be forwarded as a preliminary submission, suitable for planning purposes, and together with similar inputs from other agencies, provide a basis for development of a single, integrated, time-phased plan to focus all efforts on the objective of justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. Recommendations. Number 8. It is recommended that A. Enclosure A, together with its attachments, should be forwarded to the Secretary of Defense for approval and transmittal to the Chief of Operations Cuba Project. B. This paper not capitalized, not be forwarded to commanders of unified or specified commands. C. This paper not capitalized be forwarded to U.S. officers assigned to NATO activities. D. This paper not capitalized be forwarded to the chairman, U.S. delegation, United Nations Military Staff Committee. They don't want this going out to anyone. Okay? Now, on to the next section. Memorandum for the Secretary of Defense. Subject, justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba, top secret. Number 1. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have considered the attached memorandum for the Chief of Operations Cuba Project, which responds to a request of that office for brief but precise description of pretexts which would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. Number 2. The Joint Chiefs of Staff recommend that the proposed memorandum be forwarded as a preliminary submission suitable for planning purposes. It is assumed that there will be similar submissions from other agencies and that these inputs will be used as a basis for developing a time-phased plan. Individual projects can then be considered on a case-by-case basis. 3. Further, it is assumed that a single agency will be given the primary responsibility for developing military and paramilitary aspects of the basic plan. It is recommended that this responsibility for both overt and covert military operations be assigned to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Appendix to Enclosure A, Draft. Memorandum for Chief of Operations, Cuba Project. Subject, Justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba, top secret. Number 1. Reference is made to Memorandum from Chief of Operations, Cuba Project for General Craig. Subject, Operation Mongoose. Dated 5 March 1962, which requested brief but precise description of pretext, which the Joint Chiefs of Staff consider would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. 2. The projects listed in the enclosure here too are forwarded as a preliminary submission suitable for planning purposes. It is assumed that there will be similar submissions from other agencies and that these inputs will be used as a basis for developing a time-phased plan. The individual projects can then be considered on a case-by-case basis. 3. This plan, incorporating projects selected from the attached suggestions or from other sources, should be developed to focus all efforts on a specific ultimate objective which would provide adequate justification for U.S. military intervention. Such a plan would enable a logical buildup of incidents to be combined with other seemingly unrelated events to camouflage the ultimate object and create the necessary impression of Cuban rashness and irresponsibility on a large scale, directed at other countries as well as the United States. The plan would also properly integrate and time-phase the courses of action to be pursued. The desired resultant from the execution of this plan would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from a rash and irresponsible government of Cuba and to develop an international image of a Cuban threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere. Number 4. Time is an important factor in resolution of the Cuban problem. Therefore, the plan should be so time-phased that projects would be operable within the next few months. 5. Inasmuch as the ultimate objective is overt military intervention, it is recommended that primary responsibility for developing military and paramilitary aspects of the plan for both overt and covert military operations be assigned the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Okay. Now here we are to annex to appendix to enclosure A. It is titled Pretext to Justify U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba. Now, parentheses. Note, the courses of action which follow are a preliminary submission suitable only for planning purposes. They are arranged neither chronologically nor in ascending order. Together with similar inputs from other agencies, they are intended to provide a point of departure for the development of a single, integrated time-phased plan. Such a plan would permit the evaluation of individual products within the context of cumulative, correlated actions designed to lead inexorably to the objective of adequate justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. I know this is a little repetitive right now, but hang in there. Number 1. Since it would seem desirable to use legitimate provocation as the basis for U.S. military intervention in Cuba, a cover and deception plan to include requisite preliminary actions such as has been developed in response to Task 33C, could be executed as an initial effort to provoke Cuban reactions. I'm not familiar with Task 33. That's something else for me to look up. Harassment plus deceptive actions to convince the Cubans of imminent invasion would be emphasized. Our military posture throughout the execution of the plan will allow a rapid change from exercise to intervention if Cuban response justifies. Number 2, a series of well-coordinated incidents will be planned to take place in and around Guantanamo to give genuine appearance of being done by hostile Cuban forces. 2A, incidents to establish a credible attack, not in chronological order. Now here we go to the good stuff. 2A, number 1, start rumors, in parentheses it says many. Use clandestine radio. Number 2, 2A2. Land friendly Cubans in uniform, quote, over the fence to stage attack on base. Number 3, capture Cuban-friendly saboteurs inside the base. Number 4, start riots near the base, main gate. Friendly Cubans. So in other words, they're going to use friendly Cubans to stage a riot right in front of the base. Number 5, blow up ammunition inside the base, start fires. Number 6, burn aircraft on the base. In parentheses it says sabotage. Number 7, lob mortar shells from outside of the base into the base. Then it says some damage to installations. Number 8, capture assault teams approaching from the sea or vicinity of Guantanamo Bay. And of course, those assault teams would be fake. They'd be friendly Cubans. Number 9, capture militia group which storms the base. Again, friendlies. 10, sabotage ship in harbor. Large fires. Naphthalene. There you go. Does that sound familiar? Spanish-American War, 1898, the Maine. Number 11, sink ship near harbor entrance. Conduct funerals for mock victims. I want to read that again. Conduct funerals for mock victims. B, United States would respond by executing offensive operations to secure water and power supplies, destroying artillery and mortar emplacements which threaten the base. C, commence large-scale United States military operations. 3A, quote, remember the Maine, unquote, incident could be arranged in several forms. A, we could blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba. B, we could blow up a drone, in parentheses unmanned, vessel, a drone vessel, anywhere in the Cuban waters. So right there you know in 1962 there were drones. Oh, you thought it was a new thing, huh? No. They had planes that were drones, they had boats that were drones. I grew up in the 80s and I had a little remote control car. I saw people with remote control planes. The technology existed. We could arrange, let me just start that over. B, we could blow up a drone vessel anywhere in the Cuban waters. We could arrange to cause such incident in the vicinity of Havana or Santiago as a spectacular result of Cuban attack from the air or sea or both. The presence of Cuban planes or ships merely investigating the intent of the vessel could be fairly compelling evidence that the ship was taken under attack. The nearness to Havana or Santiago would add credibility, especially to those people that might have heard the blast or have seen the fire. The U.S. could follow up with an air-sea rescue operation covered by U.S. fighters to, quote-unquote, evacuate remaining members of the non-existent crew. Casualty lists in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of national indignation. I'll read that last sentence again. Casualty lists in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of national indignation. So right there, we know that the U.S. government is confident that they will get the help of the media, in this case, newspapers. And there's no way that there will be a problem. Obviously, they sound very confident. Number 4, we could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington. Now, what does that really specify? A communist Cuban terror campaign? Well, it's kind of hard to have terror without U.S. citizens being injured or killed. The terror campaign could be pointed at Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated. Whatever it takes. We could kill people just to get us into war? Sure. We could foster attempts on lives of Cuban refugees in the United States, even to the extent of wounding in instances to be widely publicized. Once again, widely publicized. The U.S. government is confident that they'll get the cooperation, full cooperation of the media. Scary stuff here. Exploding a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots, the arrest of Cuban agents, and the release of prepared documents substantiating Cuban involvement also would be helpful in projecting the idea of an irresponsible government. We know which government is irresponsible, don't we? Number 5, a, quote, Cuban-based, Castro-supported, unquote, filibuster could be simulated against a neighboring Caribbean nation in the vein of the 14th of June invasion of the Dominican Republic. So they're even willing to attack, our government that is even willing to attack neighbors of Cuba and blame it on Cuba. We know that Castro is backing subversive efforts clandestinely against Haiti, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Nicaragua at present, and possible others. These efforts can be magnified and additional ones contrived for exposure. For example, advantage can be taken of the sensitivity of the Dominican Air Force to intrusions within their national airspace. So the Dominican Republic, because they've been harassed by Cuba, is especially on guard, and so it would be really easy to get them to react to something. Quote-unquote Cuban B-26 or C-46 type aircraft could make cane-burning raids at night. That's the sugar cane. Soviet bloc incendiaries could be found. So in other words, they'll even find Soviet-made weapons to use. This could be coupled with quote-unquote Cuban messages to the communist underground in the Dominican Republic and quote-unquote Cuban shipments of arms which would be found or intercepted on the beach. 6. Use of MiG-type aircraft by U.S. pilots could provide additional provocation. So to get U.S. guys to fly MiGs. Harassment of civil air, attacks on surface shipping, and destruction of U.S. military drone aircraft by MiG-type planes would be useful as complementary actions. An F-86 properly painted would convince air passengers that they saw a Cuban MiG, especially if the pilot of the transport were to announce such fact. The primary drawback to this suggestion appears to be the security risk inherent in obtaining or modifying an aircraft. However, reasonable copies of the MiG could be produced from U.S. resources in about 3 months. Number 7. Hijacking attempts against civil air and surface craft should appear to continue as harassing measures condoned by the government of Cuba. Number 7. Hijacking attempts against civil air and surface craft should appear to continue as harassing measures condoned by the government of Cuba. Concurrently, genuine defections of Cuban civil and military air and surface craft should be encouraged. Number 8. It is possible to create an incident which will demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has attacked and shot down a chartered civil airliner en route from the United States to Jamaica, Guatemala, Panama, or Venezuela. The destination would be chosen only to cause the flight plan route to cross Cuba. The passengers could be a group of college students off on a holiday, or any grouping of persons with a common interest to support chartering a non-scheduled flight. Now, would these college students be CIA operatives with aliases, or would they be actual college students off on a holiday? Whatever presents itself first, I would assume. A. Now listen to this. Here's where people say that there's a connection between this Northwoods document and 9/11. This is scary stuff. An aircraft at Eglin Air Force Base would be painted and numbered as an exact duplicate for a civil registered aircraft belonging to a CIA proprietary organization in the Miami area. At a designated time, the duplicate would be substituted for the actual civil aircraft and would be loaded with the selected passengers, all boarded under carefully prepared aliases. The actual registered aircraft would be converted to a drone. Takeoff times of the drone aircraft and the actual aircraft will be scheduled to allow a rendezvous south of Florida. From the rendezvous point, the passenger-carrying aircraft will descend to minimum altitude and go directly into an auxiliary field at Eglin Air Force Base, where arrangements will have been made to evacuate the passengers and return the aircraft to its original status. The drone aircraft, meanwhile, will continue to fly the filed flight plan. When over Cuba, the drone will be transmitting on the international distress frequency a Mayday message stating he's under attack by Cuban MiG aircraft. The transmission will be interrupted by destruction of the aircraft, which will be triggered by radio signal. This will allow ICAO radio stations, and I'm assuming that's Cuba radio, in the Western Hemisphere to tell the U.S. what has happened to the aircraft, instead of the U.S. trying to sell, quote-unquote, sell the incident. It's more believable that way if it's first reported by Cuba instead of the United States. It might be a little more believable. Number 9. It is possible to create an incident which will make it appear that communist Cuban MiGs have destroyed a USAF aircraft over international waters in an unprovoked attack. Now listen how detailed this is. Approximately 4 or 5 F-101 aircraft will be dispatched in trail from Homestead Air Force Base, Florida, to the vicinity of Cuba. Their mission will be to reverse course and simulate Fakir, F-A-K-I-R, Fakir aircraft for an air defense exercise in southern Florida. These aircraft would conduct variations of these flights at frequent intervals. Crews would be briefed to remain at least 12 miles off the Cuban coast. However, they would be required to carry live ammunition in the event that hostile actions were taken by the Cuban MiGs. B. On one such flight, a pre-briefed pilot would fly tail-end Charlie at considerable interval between aircraft. While near the Cuban island, this pilot would broadcast that he had been jumped by MiGs and was going down. No other calls would be made. The pilot would then fly directly west at extremely low altitude and land at a secure base, an Eglin auxiliary. That's Eglin Air Force Base, an auxiliary base. The aircraft would be met by the proper people, quickly stored and given a new tail number. The pilot, who had performed the mission under an alias, would resume his proper identity and return to his normal place of business. The pilot and aircraft would then have disappeared. Beautiful, beautiful, but it gets even more detailed. At precisely the same time that the aircraft was presumably shot down, a submarine or small surface craft would disperse F-101 parts, parachute, etc. at approximately 15 to 20 miles off the Cuban coast and depart. The pilots returning to Homestead would have a true story as far as they knew. Search ships and aircraft could be dispatched and parts of aircraft found. So they're even willing to distribute parts of an aircraft to make it look like this thing went down. Pretty convincing. Enclosure B. Facts bearing on the problem. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have previously stated that U.S. unilateral military intervention in Cuba can be undertaken in the event that the Cuban regime commits hostile acts against U.S. forces or property, which would serve as an incident upon which to base overt intervention. Number 2. The need for positive action in the event that current covert efforts to foster an internal Cuban rebellion are unsuccessful was indicated by the Joint Chiefs of Staff on 7 March 1962 as follows. Quote, ... Determination that a credible internal revolt is impossible of attainment during the next 9 to 10 months will require a decision by the United States to develop a Cuban provocation as justification for positive U.S. military action. Unquote. Number 3. It is understood that the Department of State also is preparing suggested courses of action to develop justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. I'm sure that's not all of the document, but this is all that was released. This is all that was declassified. Now, whether you believe 9/11 was a false flag or that the United States government had previous knowledge of the thing, or whether you believe that this was just like the government said and that it was 19 Arabs who did this to the United States. Whatever you believe, understand that the United States is fully prepared to perform acts of violence on their own citizens, on citizens of other countries, or to fake provocation for war. Understand that. Now, if you understand that, then it might be a little easier to believe that the United States government could be or was complicit or knowledgeable of 9/11. My condolences to all the victims and their families.